You thought you were paying for a logo, and in a way, you were right. But what you didn't know is that the logo on your bike was probably applied in a factory where a $300 bike rolls off the same line, same building, sometimes the same workers, same address on the shipping manifest. And yet, that expensive bike really is different. The question is just, how? That's exactly what nobody tells you. And that's exactly where we're going today. More than 90% of all carbon bikes in the world are made in China. That's no longer a secret, but most brands do everything they can to keep it as invisible as possible. Trek has factories in China. Specialized has them. Canyon has them. Cervelo has them. Pinarello has them. And almost all of these brands have their frames produced by a small number of companies that most cyclists have never heard of. None of these companies appear on the frame. None of them are listed on the website. But they are the ones who actually build the frame, tube by tube, resin layer by resin layer. The two biggest players in this system are Giant and Merida, two Taiwanese manufacturers who together account for an enormous share of global carbon production. Giant started in 1977 as an OEM manufacturer for Schwinn, the American bike brand that was at its peak at the time. By the mid-1980s, Giant was making more than 2/3 of all Schwinn bikes. Schwinn thought it had a reliable supplier. What it had actually done was build a competitor. Giant grew so fast that it launched its own brand name, and today it is the largest bicycle manufacturer in the world. Merida followed the same path and still does production for a range of major brands. The relationships sometimes go deeper than pure manufacturing. Merida holds a 49% stake in Specialized. The same Specialized hanging in the shop for $4,000 has a manufacturer as a shareholder that also makes frames for other brands. And Specialized is not unique in that. This is how the cycling industry works, and has worked for decades. But here is where the nuance that most people miss begins. Because the fact that multiple brands end up at the same factory does not mean they are buying the same bike. The factory is the address. What gets produced at that address depends entirely on the instructions the brand brings with it. And those instructions are as different as the bikes themselves. To understand that, you need to know how the system is divided into 3 clear layers, 3 levels, where the level A brand chooses determines to a large extent what you as a buyer end up holding in your hands, and whether that thing will still hold together when you need it to. The first level is what the industry calls an open mold. An open mold is a mold that the factory itself owns and offers to anyone who wants to order. You send in your logo, pick a color, choose a few minor geometry parameters, and 3 months later, 100 bikes with your name on them are rolling through a port. No proprietary research and development, no wind tunnel testing, no custom engineering. You bought a catalog frame and put a sticker on it. Anyone can do that. There is no minimum knowledge required. There is no minimum investment required beyond the order price. This is the segment of the market where you find most cheap carbon bikes, from AliExpress, from small brands you have never heard of, and sometimes from brands that do have a recognizable name, but are not willing to spend the money on anything else. The open mold market has existed for decades and is enormous in scale. There are dozens of factories in China and Vietnam that operate exclusively in this mode, with catalogs of 100 or more frame models that any brand can order off the shelf. Rob Gatellis, who led Factor Bikes and spent decades working inside the Taiwanese and Chinese carbon industry, described open molds as one step away from the counterfeit Pinarellos you can buy at markets. That is not a metaphor. Same mold, same dimensions, different sticker, and sometimes a higher price than the counterfeit version because there is a European or American postal address on the website. The second level is the custom mold, a proprietary mold. Here a brand is paying for exclusivity. A complete set of molds for a frame set across all sizes costs roughly $100,000. That is before a single frame has been produced. Bike has been painted before a single employee has packed anything. That money buys one thing. This frame exists nowhere else. But the factory producing it is the same factory filling open molds for other customers. The workers are the same. The machines are the same. The production lines run side by side. The difference lies entirely in what the brand sends along in terms of technical specifications: the layup, the carbon grade, the resin choice, the plybook. These are the decisions that determine how a frame actually rides, how it fatigues under use, how it fails under impact. And with a custom mold, the brand retains complete control over all of those decisions. Brands like Trek, Specialized, and Canyon sit at this level for the majority of their lineup. The third level is fully owned production. Factories like Giant itself and Factor Bikes, which own their own molds, source their own carbon, and run their own quality control from the first sheet of fiber to the final coat of paint. These are the most expensive frames, but also the most transparent. Giant publishes openly what it does. Factor opened its factory to journalists. These brands hide nothing because they have nothing to hide. The factory is the product. And that is a fundamentally different story from the one you are told when you walk into a bike shop. Now we get to carbon grade, because this is the area where most buyers draw their conclusions, and they almost always draw the wrong ones. T700, T800, T1000. You see these letters on spec sheets and advertisements, and it feels like an objective ranking. Higher letter is better. Higher letter is more expensive. Higher letter is safer. The reality is more nuanced. T700 has a tensile strength of around 4,900 megapascals and a modulus of 230 gigapascals. T800 sits at 5,800 megapascals and 294 gigapascals. T1000 reaches 7,000 megapascals. These are Toray specifications, the Japanese manufacturer that has set the market standard for carbon fiber, measured in a laboratory under controlled conditions. But a frame is not a fiber. It is a layered structure of carbon fibers, resin, and engineering decisions. And the resin, the matrix that holds the fibers together and absorbs compressive forces, is at least as important as the fiber grade itself. Industry experts are clear about this. The compressive strength of a carbon frame can double if you use a better resin. Double. That is not a marginal improvement on paper. That is the difference between a frame that lasts years under daily loading and a frame that fails on the first serious crash or impact. And this is one of the central ways factories cut costs on cheap open mold frames. Cheaper resin, fewer layers of fiber, less precise placement. The resin is also the most invisible part of the whole story. You cannot see resin quality when you hold a frame. You can feel the weight, inspect the paint, check the cable guides, but what is inside the matrix structure of the fibers is completely invisible to the naked eye. That is precisely why resin is such an effective place to save money. The buyer does not notice until it is too late. Two frames that both contain T800 fiber, made at the same factory in the same week, can differ astronomically if one uses expensive resin and the other does not. And no spec sheet anywhere in the world tells you which resin was used. On top of that comes the plybook, the document that specifies how the fibers are positioned, at which angles, in how many layers, and at exactly which location in the frame. This is the real engineering work. A frame built from T700 fiber with an outstanding plybook developed by an experienced engineer can be stiffer, safer, and lighter than a frame built from T1000 fiber with a careless layup. Trek has 5 different OCLV grades: 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, that differ not just in fiber grade, but in how the layers are arranged and which resin combinations are used. That is the result of years of engineering work, hundreds of material tests, and feedback from professional writers. An open mold factory does not have that plybook. The plybook is the factory's plybook, standard, unoptimized, designed for the most average application that satisfies everyone who orders from it and truly serves no one. What are you actually paying for when you buy an expensive carbon bike? Partly for materials, but that part is smaller than you think. The real costs are somewhere else. They are in the mold investment. $100,000 for a proprietary mold gets recouped over the sale of thousands of frames, and that investment guarantees the frame is unique, tested, and optimized for that specific geometry and that specific rider profile. They are in quality control. Major brands have inspection processes at the factory itself, and after frames have been constructed. Rob Gatellis put it this way: there are 5 large carbon factories and 50 smaller ones. To get access to the top 5, you need to be Trek, Specialized, or Scott. Brands taking enough volume to make those factories interested in a long-term quality relationship. If you are among the 50 smaller ones, the quality gap is significant, and you as a brand need to actively keep monitoring what is being produced. Small brands that do not do that sometimes do not know exactly what they are selling. And then there is testing. Serious frames are tested to international standards like ISO 4210, which measures fatigue, impact resistance, and lifespan across thousands of loading cycles. Open mold frames are not required to do that. Some factories do it voluntarily, most do not. That sounds abstract until you understand how carbon fails under damage. Carbon often does not show visible damage until after internal damage has already occurred. A hit that internally fractures a tube while leaving the outside clean is more dangerous than a crack you can see. A certified frame has gone through these kinds of scenarios in a testing laboratory before it ever reaches a rider. Brands with their own quality control processes also catch this kind of frame before it leaves the building, through visual inspection, ultrasound detection, and weight verification. And a brand like Trek or Specialized stands behind its carbon with a warranty program and a replacement process if a frame fails. A frame you bought for $300 from a web shop that might not exist in 6 months has none of that. No test certificate, no warranty, no support if something goes wrong 100 kilometers from home on a mountain pass. What all of this means is the following. Your cheap carbon bike and your expensive carbon bike might come from the same country. Maybe even the same industrial zone, the same city, the same building. But the chance that they came from the same plybook, were built with the same resin, were designed by the same engineer, and were inspected to the same quality standard, is essentially zero. The price of a bike is not a direct measure of the quality of the carbon itself, but it is a measure of the amount of engineering, testing, and control that went into it. And with carbon, engineering is everything. A brand that invested $100,000 in a proprietary mold worked with a Toray-certified composite supplier for the right resin system, had its frames independently tested, and built out a warranty program for when things go wrong. That brand is selling you something fundamentally different from the web shop that ordered an open mold frame and put a sticker on it. It is not the name on the frame that determines whether you make it safely down the mountain. It is what is inside the tubes. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one.